Live from New York City, it's Thursday morning. Here we go, it's live. I am in New York and it's Thursday. Patricia is still on spring break from UMD, University of Maryland. So it's a solo episode today. We have a fantastic guest who I can't wait for you all to meet, so let's jump in. Welcome to The Art Equation.
Welcome to The Art Equation, a podcast from Now Be Here. I'm one of your hosts, Patricia Ortega, and our historian and independent curator.
I'm your other host, Kim Schoenstatt, a contemporary artist and organizer of Now Be Here, a directory of and for women and non-binary artists.
On this podcast, we have a little charla, a little bachipapo about making art and making exhibitions. We invite fellow artists, curators, archivists, and people from different areas of the art world to share their knowledge and their experience.
We are curious about what goes on in the day-to-day of arting. We want to talk shop, get in the weeds about what goes into art shows, talk with the makers and the doers of the art world. Welcome to The Art Equation. Our guest today is Matilde Guidelli Guidi from Dia Art Foundation. We are in the Foundation's library in New York City. For our listeners, Dia was founded in New York in 1974 and is a foundation committed to advancing, realizing, and preserving the vision of artists. Dia fulfills its missions by commissioning single artist projects, organizing exhibitions, realizing site-specific installation, and collecting in-depth the work of a focused group of artists of the 60s and 70s. I found this part interesting on the website that the name was selected to suggest the institution's role in enabling such ambitions. They selected the name Dia, taken from the Greek word meaning through. They have 9 permanent sites across the United States and Germany, as well as 3 changing exhibition spaces in New York. And they have a wonderful curator, Matilde, who we are lucky to get to speak with on the podcast today. Welcome to The Art Equation, Matilde.
Thank you.
Just so listeners can kind of get to know you a little bit better, I'm going to read an edited bio, but your bio is like really impressive and crazy. So this is just a little snippet. Matilde Guidelli Guidi is curator and co-department head at Dia Art Foundation, where she has organized exhibitions of work by Leslie Hewitt, Mario Merz, Senga Nengudi, Cameron Rowland, Meg Webster, and Jack Whitten, among others, and edited the helpful publication, An Introduction to Dia's Locations and Sites in 2021, as well as Jack Whitten, The Greek Alphabet Paintings 2023, and Populated Air, a primary source book on Nengudi in 2025. She is responsible for overseeing Dia's permanent cited works by Walter DeMaria, Max Newhouse, and Joseph Boys, and as the organizer of the Artists on Artists lecture series, she's commissioned a growing roster of contemporary artists to respond to their peers in Dia's institutional history. Prior to joining Dia, she worked at international institutions including the Musée Louvre, the Paula Cooper Gallery, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, and taught courses in art and architecture history at the City College and Hunter College, CUNY. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I kind of joke around that this podcast is a moment that I get to ask dumb questions that I've always wanted to ask. So I'm always curious about backgrounds. I worked with many curators through my years with Baldessari and his studio, and through my own work, but I've never really understood how somebody becomes a curator. Can you take us through your journey to becoming a curator?
Yes, of course. I think as we were saying, as we were preparing for this, I think a big question for me is like, what is a curator? What people understand of what is a curator? I myself was born in Italy and finished my master's in France, and there what a curator is predominantly somebody who administers and oversees and manages public collections as well as the national heritage. There is a lot of scholarship involved, and a curator of contemporary art, I think the big difference is that you work very closely with an artist, so you both have, in the best case, you work closely with an artist or with a group of artists, so sometimes to create new work as well.
So that's going to present certain challenges, right? If you're working with a dead artist, they can't really talk back.
True, but I guess generally speaking, I would expand the notion of curator to not only somebody who kind of oversees and maintains collections, but also works closely with an artist to realize new work and or to present their work to the public, and then of course also to make arguments through the exhibition and kind of create a discursive space in the exhibition that you decide to put together. My approach or my kind of arriving to curating, I guess I was trained as a historian. I studied art and architecture history in Italy, where I was born, and then in France, and then I did postgraduate studies here in the United States. But throughout, I continued to work jobs that had me close to either archives of living artists or living artists themselves. And that was working for several years for an art gallery called the Paula Cooper Gallery, where I produced exhibitions with artists, both presented within the gallery or other locations outside of the gallery, while at the same time keeping up the archives that the gallery maintains. But I also, at the same time, worked in different institutions in New York, predominantly working with art from the 60s and 70s onwards. And that led me to, a little over 5 years ago, starting to work at DIA.
So one thing that is really interesting, I mean, I want to ask about DIA also, but one of the things that's interesting that you just said about your trajectory is you're coming also from focus on archives. And DIA, like I think of the dirt room, right? That's not
Earth room.
Earth room, thank you. The dirt room.
It's dirt.
It's dirt. I think of Earth Room, it is an archive. It's like a living archive, right? It's preserving this moment in time. And so there's the paper archives and there's the sort of the business of art archives, but then there's actually the holding space for works to continue to evolve archive.
Yeah, for sure. And DIA is a special place because DIA was established to partner with artists to realize works precisely cited in the urban landscape or in the urban fabric or in the landscape at large, and not necessarily tied to a museum building. So DIA would kind of partner with an artist to realize a project, and that would involve, as is the example of Walter de Maria's Earth Room, finding literally an apartment in New York City where de Maria could realize the work and then maintaining that in perpetuity. So there was both the idea, which I guess is a bit unusual, the idea of partnering with the artist to realize a project, which is very 70s, if you wish. Yeah. But then the project, rather than being ephemeral, there was this other parallel idea that DIA had, which is permanence. And therefore, today, one can visit the Earth Room in the exact state in which de Maria conceived it, at this point, plus 45 years ago.
By working so closely with artists, then you're also able to get their sort of like, do this, don't do this.
Yes, for sure.
And you really get an understanding of where the limits of caring for the artwork are, right? Like as an artist, when I go into an exhibition, that's my first volley of questions are like, where are my boundaries?
Yeah.
Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? Like, when do I hit the ceiling here?
Yeah.
So then when DIA is commissioning artworks, you are kind of playing with a similar game, I guess.
Yeah, I guess every artist is different. Some artists have a very clear idea of what they want to realize, how to fabricate it, how to make it happen. They're given parameters and they come to you with a proposal that is kind of rare, but it happens. And then your role as a curator is very much that of a producer implementing the idea and kind of advising the artist in the most possible way, but also negotiating with or working together with the larger staff of the institution to realize this proposal. Most artists instead have many ideas, and therefore you become, if not a co-creator, definitely an important interlocutor in finessing the idea.
Yeah.
And even teasing out how to turn an idea into a three-dimensional presentation, what the best medium is. So it's really a spectrum in terms of where the conversation leads you as a curator in terms of how much advising versus managing and producing.
But that's back to the question of what is a curator and what does a curator do? Like your job description, it's not like you do this, you do this, you do this. Like now you're talking about really co-creating.
I would say more like a co-thinker.
Yeah, or like coaching. Like helping the artist sort of refine the ideas so that it's an achievable, realistic.
Yeah, both those are very important terms, of course. What are the boundaries of the institution, what the institution can do well is something that as a curator I know. and therefore I can convey to the artist, well, this idea is good, but this is not something we do well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a kind of carrying the artist through the process of realizing an exhibition and thinking with them. Or also seeing sometimes when somebody's so close to an idea that they are wishing to realize, they might not see the big picture. So that helps also in my role to be able to say, hey, this is great, but actually this is how all this will come together.
Right.
So that is when commissioning. But then, of course, the beautiful part of the job at DIA is that, of course, we also still continue to work with artists who came of age in the 60s and 70s, some of whom are no longer with us. Therefore, there's both opportunities as well as managing a collection that is unique because of its formation, meaning that it's not only housed in our storages, but in the landscape.
Well, that was one of my questions. Like, this is such a specific institution.
For
like,
sure.
And I always think of it as sort of like big boy sculpture, right? Like, so what drew you to, I mean, it feels like it was a bit of a natural progression, right? Moving from these institutions and then going to Paula Cooper Gallery, which is actually just a couple blocks away. But what drew you to Dia's Where I Need to Be?
I think, to be honest, when I moved to New York, even before starting working at Paula's, I stumbled into Dia as a discursive space. And actually, in the library where we are now, this was our former program space. In 2021, we renovated the Chelsea galleries, and we have a new, relatively new at this point, 4 years old, bookstore and program space that is at street level. But before the pandemic, this was our program space on the 5th floor of 535 West 22nd Street.
Which is a little less accessible, right? Like
a little less accessible, but of course there was an elevator, and that, yes, for sure created situations sometimes in which an artist was giving a presentation and you could hear the elevator going off.
Ding, ding.
Ding, ding. But it was still wonderful and very convivial, and it's quite the same footprint as downstairs. But just to say that I was one of the people calling the elevator to come upstairs, and discovered that very regularly Dia was hosting 2 recurring series. One is called Artist on Artist, in which was established in 2001 by Lynn Cook, who was the curator at Dia then. And the premise is very simple: to invite an artist, a contemporary artist, to think about the work of another artist in Dia's collection or program. So it doesn't need to be an artwork that is in the collection. It can be an exhibition that Dia has had in the past, but whose work Dia doesn't steward. And that happened once a month. And second, poetry readings that also happened once a month. So there were these 2 occasions, and it was really a space in which a lot of artists would be in the room and come to their friend's presentation to talk about a third artist. So that level of discourse and kind of also access to an earlier generation of production of art in New York City was super important to me. So that was the first thing that I realized, is that this was an institution that was really artist-centered, and that it was not only artist-centered in the sense that helped artists produce works, but also create a community among them and discourse across generations and perspectives. So that was very interesting. And then the other interesting thing to me is precisely how Dia has maintained itself as an institution that, yes, now for the past 20 years we have Dia Beacon, which is a fantastic, truly incredible place and a repository of our collection, where we display the collection and we rotate it. But at the same time, it had this openness to continuing to think outside the boundaries of a traditional museum building. And that at the level even of infrastructure and logistics, that is something that is quite interesting to me.
Yeah, this idea of time.
Yeah.
Right. Dia seems to have a different relationship to time.
Yeah, and again, I kind of relate that to, there's the founding philosophy, which was very much about this idea of permanence and kind of returning to artworks that then become landmarks. So that it's kind of elevating contemporary art to landmarks. Dia founder would say Giotto Chapel in Padova, the Scrovegni Chapel, like this kind of art and architecture merges that then remain as landmarks through the centuries. So there was this original idea around permanence that had those connotations, but to me, what we retain is the idea that an exhibition stays on view at least 1 year. I think that's really beautiful in terms, again, of creating an opportunity or a platform for a group of people over a year to see the exhibition. And then, I mean, in all likelihood, everybody at the end of the year, not everybody, but like many people at the end of the year will have seen the exhibition, and that create a collective knowledge and awareness of this exhibition because of, and a collective memory of that.
Yeah. You're dealing with a different type of attention and developing a relationship, because there's definitely been shows like I could get through it, but I get full. And then I need to go back because it was too crowded or the work was too much, and I was like, oh man, I want to go back 5 times. And especially, like, you're not talking about a painting on the wall. Like, these are big installations. Just so listeners can kind of get a sense, we're not talking about small spaces. This isn't like a kitchen size space.
No, the 2 Chelsea galleries, again, Dia Chelsea consists of a bookstore, a program space where we program weekly events, and 2 vast galleries. They were former warehouses when Chelsea was a port, single floor.
Yeah, so they're huge.
With skylights. They're quite huge, yes. And the 2 galleries are now connected, so one can go from one to the other and then loop back to the bookstore.
Yeah.
And we typically invite an artist to present an exhibition, and at times organize historical shows. The current exhibition is an exhibition of Steve McQueen, the artist and filmmaker. And we have, in the first gallery, one of the characteristics of these spaces is natural light, because like many old warehouse buildings, there's stunning skylights. But Steve, being a filmmaker and light being very important in his work, he actually modified the architecture of the gallery quite a bit. The first space is shortened and shallower than it typically is, so the viewer enters through a corridor and gets in a first gallery where there are photographs that Steve took this past summer, of flowers in Granada, and an early video that he made in the 90s in London, following 2 men carrying a coconut plant. Beautiful early work. And then continuing through this corridor, which becomes a soundproof corridor, so there's almost like a special effect leading you to the vastest of the 2 spaces, which is in total darkness, as we have his film Sunshine State, which is a multi-channel film that Steve realized a couple of years ago and that we are presenting for the first time in New York City.
So it's interesting, you have that on, and then MoMA has, Museum of Modern Art, has the Christian Marclay clock, which we went to see the other day.
Oh, wonderful.
And it was one of those things where it was like my partner, husband, and I, when we saw it in LA, we actually sat in the theater for a long time. Because you kind of just get into this meditative
100%
flow state. And one of the things that I'm enjoying about Dia's approach, right? Like we were talking back before about that there's a churning of like show after show after show, and you have to catch it. It's a short amount of time. But here, what you've created, it's almost like a friend that you get to hang out with for a year.
That's a beautiful way to say it. It's interesting you mentioned Christian Marclay, because that is the very first artist I worked with. The clock was presented at the Venice Biennale, and I had just started to work for Paula Cooper. And Paula, there was a question of finding a site where to present the work, because it's a 24/7. It's a 24-hour piece, of course, but the hours,
that's kind of a big ask.
Right, and the hours of the Venice Biennale are maybe, let's say, 10 to 7.
Yeah, they have unionized sort of workers.
Somehow it was a matter of having the piece in the big show, but at the same time finding a side venue where to present the piece 24 hours so that people could experience the piece in full outside of the premises of the Biennale. So that is an example of something one does in this profession, which is I spent 3 weeks in Venice, and even if I'm Italian, I'd never been to the Venice Biennale before. So I spent 3 weeks in Venice and trying to find a venue for the clock. And now it's at MoMA, because of course then it was purchased by MoMA. But the interesting thing in terms of like seeing film in galleries is how artists have, some artists, not all of them, but really thought about presentation and viewership. So in the case of the clock, the piece comes with those sofas.
Oh my God! It comes with it. Okay, so
Like,
I saw that at MoMA. So
yes.
yeah, we have to now. Now I'm realizing we have to kind of set this up. So listeners, The Clock is a movie where artist Christian Marclay went through all of these old movies and found all of the moments in movies where the camera looks at a clock at a specific time, or the people are saying, "What time is it?" and somebody looks at their watch.
Yeah.
And it's literally per minute.
Yeah.
And
For 24 hours.
For 24 hours. And there was always these couches.
There was a thought about, it's not like people can stand, and because obviously that would be uncomfortable if you want to see 3 hours of a piece.
Right, unless you're Cory Booker.
Yes. But yeah, we had another fantastic artist whose name is Lucy Raven. She also presented a film in the Chelsea Galleries in 2021, and she also was thinking about viewership for seeing film in the galleries, and she actually, because of the context and concept of her piece, she wanted bleachers, kind of stadium bleachers, so people would sit on bleachers. But that becomes like the way we sit through a viewing experience. It's all part and parcel of putting together the exhibition.
Right, so you're not looking at exhibitions here in terms of like, oh, we just need a bench, let's get a bench.
Yeah, there's thought in every, I think that at best an exhibition is where there is thought in every aspect, and it almost creates kind of a relational space where you enter and there's a sense of almost like crossing a portal, and even if it's almost imperceptible, but you would notice the opposite. You would start noticing, oh, the film is great, but it's really uncomfortable, or it's really uncomfortable, but this adds to the discomfort of the film, so maybe the discomfort is intentional.
Right.
So I think, yeah, one of the things I like the most about curating or presenting, a talk, or it's very much what is the full ambient that we are offering, not specifically just an object, if you wish.
Because then there's also all of the stuff that goes around it, which I'd like to dip back into the artists on artists, because you restarted this, and Lynn Cook left here and then she went on to, and I'm totally...
Lynn is now at the National Gallery of Arts in DC.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
But in between, many other curators worked on the series following Lynn, and I started working on the series in 2019 when I joined DIA. And my colleague Kelly Kivland was working on the series at the time. And generally speaking, it got interrupted basically because of the pandemic.
Right. But was that something that you could then pick up? Because it was important to be in person?
It was important to be in person. It's one of the few programs that we did not transition to online.
Interesting.
Precisely because, after so many years since its founding, after about 20 years, obviously the landscape has changed in terms of artists living and working in New York. And so thinking about a new generation who might not be so much in touch. Like now there are 3 generations between the art of the 60s and 70s and contemporary artists today. And some of the artists and DIA itself might not be as meaningful or as present in people's imaginary as it was in the early 2000s, where many artists who were invited in the series had been maybe the assistants of artists, or even studied with them, or worked as gallery attendants in DIA's galleries. In everything we do, there are real kind of larger socioeconomic conditions that affect how all of us operate, be it a curator, an institution, or an artist. And maybe people don't have that interest in lecturing in a kind of academic way. Right. But there's other avenues that can be taken in terms of presenting thoughts on another artist. So the lectures are often lectures by name, but actually very performative. And to present online would have been really limiting, unless online presentation is the medium of choice of an artist. Right. That would have become very limited. And again, one of the most important thing I think of the lecture is the discursive space and the audience. Yeah, I was going to ask, does the artist ever show up? No, but as a courtesy, I always send an email to, definitely I contact the estate or the gallery representatives or the artists themselves if they're alive. Interesting. and typically, especially because we do research, and it's really, as everything at DIA is really a collaborative effort with the whole department. We're a very small curatorial department, and we work very closely on everything, and as well as with our program producer and our amazing AV technician.
So that probably keeps it pretty nimble.
Yeah, we're a small staff. We work very well together and
right.
Adapting to the needs of an artist. Yesterday night we had one lecture that was definitely very special.
Oh, I'm sorry to have missed it. Who was that?
The artist's name is Martine Sims.
Oh, yeah.
And Martine, a couple of years ago, visited The Lightning Field, which is a work by Walter de Maria, sited in the landscape in New Mexico. Western New Mexico. And it's quite isolated, and the methodology of visitorship is quite intentional. Only 6 people per night can visit it.
And you stay in like a cabin?
I stay in a cabin overnight, yes.
And he put these lightning rods just throughout this giant field?
Yes, stainless steel poles. It's an array of a grid of 1 mile per 1 kilometer. And there is nothing on view beside the field, and you take a flight, and then a smaller plane, and then a truck, and then finally you are at the lightning field, and somebody picks you up the following day after you spend the night. And Martine experienced this, and she was interested in the more metaphysical aspects of the work. De Maria was interested in invisibility and isolation, and the poles are stainless steel, so you can imagine in the high desert, as there's clouds, they may disappear because light is not hitting them in the same way, or at sunset they look like they're gold. There's this kind of dynamic of visibility that happens on the field, and you're also, sitting with yourself in the vast expanse of nature.
Yeah, you have to be very present, I would think.
Yes.
I would hope people just kind of throw their phones away and...
Yeah, that's our request, our suggestion. At this point with phones we can't enforce it, but no pictures and...
right, not a selfie space.
There's basically no signal, but there's a phone in the cabin, a landline, in case there's an emergency,
Of course, practical.
But Martine visited and was very intrigued by the more metaphysical aspects of the work, meaning De Maria hinting at the piece as an energy field. What she decided to do is what is called a constellation reading, which, if I had to explain what a constellation reading is, at the intersection of a seance, kind of where spirits are evoked, and a group dynamic session, so more kind of into psychology and implicit biases and relational psychological readings that can happen even in a corporate setting. And so a constellation reading is facilitated by a constellation specialist and requires resonators, which Martine chose among friends of hers who participated in this public constellation reading, in which somebody asks a question and people are given roles to help the person who asked the question achieving an answer. And some of it is revealed to everyone, and some of it remains for the person who asked the question, in this case Martine, to her. And we had cameras and live feed that would essentially create this mise en abîme in the space, in which we had projectors projecting the live feed so that you would see what was happening on stage, but also see the work reflected and refracted on the walls of the space. And people essentially were invited to tune in what was happening as this kind of object theater / play / live TV episode. It was a mixture of a lot of things.
Was it projected outside of the space or just within the space?
Within. So there was this kind of reverberation. It's almost like the what was it? The Dan Graham. Yeah, creating some kind of live feed that
feeds back on itself.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is an example of how she picked on this one aspect of De Maria and built a whole situation out of it. This is what the series can produce.
Yeah, I kind of love that, because it's not a dry lecture about sort of like, here's what he did and here's when he did it and let's look at it from this angle. Not that that doesn't have its place and importance, but I guess that is kind of the exciting thing about artists on artists. You never know what you're going to get, right? Like we definitely are approaching it from an artist standpoint.
Yeah. And some artists gave incredible academic lectures. Some others didn't even show up, but prepared a musical score, for instance. With the moment we invite an artist, it's always because we know that in their studio there is already a conversation.
Right.
Maybe latent, maybe not revealed, with an artist who would be in Dia's collection or past program. So we offer them an opportunity to expand that conversation, and both research support as well as financial support, and then a public platform, a public stage where to express their thoughts.
Now I'm trying to put it all together.
Yeah.
You guys work on exhibitions that go on for a year. So how many years in advance do you plan? And then can you share what the process is like from the journey from conception to completion?
Yeah. One thing that is helpful to think about is we have maybe 3 kinds of exhibitions. Not all exhibitions are the same. There's commissions, which is, as we were saying, something in which we think thoroughly which artists we want to commission, and then that conversation can go on for 4 years leading to the exhibition. And because it implies producing new work and a lot of things to figure out, we work a lot with our incredible collection, which is uniquely in depth, which means that if you think about going to MoMA, for example, or to the Whitney, you would have in the collection maybe 1, maybe 2 works by one artist, but then maybe 1,000 artists in the collection, whereas Dia is about 80 artists in the collection, but at least you would say an average of like 10 works per artist. So that already is an exhibition. So we do collection exhibitions, and those might take less time, of course, to put together. But those are opportunities for us to do new research on works that are in the collection.
Do you infill with borrowing?
Exactly. And then we also always augment, there's obviously exceptions, but we typically augment those exhibitions with loans so that we can create dialogue between collection works and works that are not in the collection. And then a third modality of curating an exhibition is a 100% loan show, in which, and an example is the Jack Whitten Greek alphabet painting exhibitions that we presented a couple of years ago, and that was an artist who is no longer with us, who came of age in the 60s and 70s, whose work is incredibly important in dialogue with Dia's collection. And that is an example of an exhibition that took about 3 years to research and 3 years to secure the loans, find the paintings where they are, and all that process of kind of putting together a loan show.
Was that show here at the Chelsea
was up
space?
in Beacon.
In Beacon.
Yeah.
And that's a newer space. Was that a built space? Or was that another sort of...
Most of the spaces are adaptive reuse, which means that essentially they were former predominantly industrial buildings. So that is the case for Beacon. That was an Nabisco boxes factory up to the turn of the century, and then up to the maybe mid-century probably. Worked closely with an artist, Robert Irwin, to renovate it, but leaving very much the character of the building. So again, natural light and modular spaces and brick facade.
And I also like that the space, when it isn't used for programming, is also just still open to the public for like public respite.
Yeah, if one wants to. And one of course of the great things is that Dia Chelsea is free, which is quite incredible. We are surrounded by commercial galleries. Dia is a non-profit, so there's a huge difference in terms of operational economies. But we're very happy that the galleries, as well as the bookstore and the public program space, they are free admission, so somebody can come in, take a peek at the Steve McQueen work in this case, but also just pick up a book and sit in the program space and rest.
Yeah, and that's important in this space.
Yeah, especially in
time.
kind of like in New York, where there's so little space with that flexibility. I think none of us is used to that.
Right.
It's more like every space has a transactional nature. You enter, you cannot stay too long, you have to leave, or you have to pay, or so it's trying to create something that is welcoming.
Almost like a community center in a way.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, but that is, I mean, it's kind of an interesting, it's kind of a radical concept. Okay, so I do tend to think of the curator's life as being very glamorous and like studio visits and schmoozing and lunching, and it might be a more like mine where it's mostly administration and communication. We've covered that a quote unquote curator does like almost everything, anything. So what does a typical day look like?
That's a great question. I mean, a lot of meetings to coordinate with our colleagues across departments, as well as with artists, of course. Perhaps my favorite part would be the research and writing and ideating with the department and with the artists. A very important part, and probably the predominant part, is administration.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that, but it's essential to what we do.
100%.
So administration and research and communication, and then kind of thinking logistically, and both granular and big picture thinking, kind of like going back and forth between those two scales is also something that happens on a daily basis. So there can be a meeting that is very, very precise about the sand in an artwork that is getting too humid, and therefore we need to find a solution to make sure that it doesn't mold. Or
oh my God.
What is the next 5 years of programming? So yeah, there's multiple scales of what the meetings might entail. I think maybe to give an example of a day that was perhaps a bit unusual, but that if I have to think about yesterday, I had the great pleasure to go up to Beacon with an artist whose name is Louise Lawler. We have a work of hers which we maintain. It's not part of the collection, it's a long-term loan, but we maintain precisely in Beacon's West Gardens, and the work is a sound piece called Bird Calls, and it's a work that Louise realized where you think it's birds chirping, but it's actually birds calling out the name of male artists, most of whom are in Dia's collection. So it's a piece that when Dia Beacon opened seemed perfect to include and to have as a permanent presence in our beautiful West Garden. And the reason why we were going to Beacon on a closed day was to meet with my colleague Randy Gibson, who is our AV specialist, because we were thinking about how to improve the sound. We just renovated the West Garden, and now after the renovation, as we reopen the gardens for spring, we want to make sure that the sound sounds good.
Right.
And so that was an example of maintaining a work that has been on view for 20 years.
Right.
And working closely with the artists and with the amazing expertise that we have on staff to improve something that actually is already fantastic, but nevertheless to make it an even better experience.
That's a pretty exciting day.
That's an exciting day, but it's not over, because then we had the Martine Sims talk here. And in between, part of the cast of characters that were needed for the Constellation session was a chair, which is an artwork by Martine, and the chair is at her gallery, Bridget Donahue, and so we picked up the chair and brought it to Chelsea. And
did you just push a cart over?
No, the art handlers helped.
Yeah, professionals.
Yes, and then we worked with, again, my colleague, my co-department head, Jordan Carter, and Ella, then Elzen, our curatorial assistant on the Artist on Artist series, as well as Kim Golding, our program producer, and Max Tannen, our AV specialist for Chelsea, to welcome all the presenters and do a final tech rehearsal before the program, and then we opened the doors at 6:15, and then we held the program.
Oh my God.
So that was an example of a day in which things that had been prepared for conversation with Martine started over a year ago. Conversation with Louise, almost basically around, okay, we are reopening the West Garden, how's the sound, what do you think, what should we do? It was an example of how a year of conversations panned out into a single day, if you wish.
Yeah, no, that's amazing.
Yeah, but kind of I think it explains also the temporality of what it is to work collectively and thoughtfully.
Yeah.
And so how much time it takes, it's not just, we're doing this talk with Martine, okay, let's schedule it for next week. no, it takes a year to gestate, for Martine to have an idea, maybe 2 years ago even, because she visited 2 years ago.
Okay, so in one day you've been like an audio tech. Being a curator is a really dynamic job, and I think we
it was the dynamic part, and maybe like it was a year of office correspondence. It can be that was an example of kind of the different speeds, and like to kind of try and convey how much sedentary and email exchange and kind of administrative and kind of coordination goes and thinking goes into then. So it happens that actually convergence is such that schedules align on the fact that in one day things can come to fruition, but things that had been in planning for 1 year.
Right. Kind of amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I think I have both more and less of an idea of what a curator does.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
It's definitely, I think clearly collaboration again. It's not something that one person does, meaning
No.
one person can proactively mediate between the artist or an archive or a set of readings and ideas with a staff that makes it all happen together. So it's not a single solitary endeavor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so at the end of conversations, we have a sort of ending question, and it's really blue sky. Like you can go whichever direction you want to go with it. And the question is, what project would you do if you had unlimited funding and time?
Oh my God.
I know.
Oh, that's really hard.
That's a hard one for a curator, maybe, because you would probably have a few in your chamber that you're like, wait, but I could do this, but I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But
well, definitely like a vacation. That's the first project that comes to mind.
What would the ideal vacation then look like?
Going to an island that lays out and read.
There we go. That's it. Okay, finally, we want to wrap up with some thank yous. Thank you so much, Matilde, for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
And we want to thank Sky Park Tausig for being our wonderful producer, Taras Matla at the University of Maryland Art Gallery, and Jonathan Formansky for letting us use your music. Thank you to our listeners. We're so grateful for your support of the project. I wanted to remind women and non-binary artists to join the directory. It's free to artists and users, and we're getting amazing feedback from curators who use it to get to know your work better. Again, thank you, Matilde, for speaking with us today. All right, everyone, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
We are The Art Equation. You can find us wherever you listen every other Thursday.
Thanks for being here with us. We'd really love to hear your thoughts. So please subscribe. And if you have a moment to leave a review, it really helps us out. We love the feedback. Talk to you soon here on The Art Equation. The Art Equation is a podcast from Now Be Here with support from the University of Maryland Art Gallery. Now Be Here is a directory and resource created by and for women and non-binary artists. You can find more information at www.nowbehereart.com.